I'll tell them if it...
Not in there?
You enjoy your apartment.
I mean, might come back.
They just want to know.
Not good.
No, I think it
Right.
Maybe they didn't hear you. No, they're all coming back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7.
Half an hour.
Well, Abby just keeps us silent.
And if you hadn't have given that coffee, you'd have been
There's obviously a meeting happening somewhere else because I don't know where the rest of the committee have disappeared to.
so no more.
Okay.
1, 2,
Got it.
3,
Alright, fair enough.
5,
Start sending from
7, 8.
7.
Right, we're ready.
He's probably getting...
Just wait for. I'll just wait for Councillor Filipaina.
Good wine.
It's just not...
No, it's not.
Just I want to start without the deputy chair.
coming back.
Actually. Yes, I know what you mean. Get it back. Get it back.
Where's the sausage in the middle of it? You seem to get 4 brothers.
I managed to get get some pay. Slap into the curve. Got committees and don't get any extra pay.
That was pretty easy. That was pretty easy to get that.
Right. Couldn't do it without our wonderful deputy chair in the room. So I just want to thank everyone for coming back. I, again, just want to reiterate my thanks to everybody who's presented and for sharing, what is a really challenging decision with us today. As I said at the beginning of the meeting, our staff have been working on this for several years, and particularly over the summer, almost full time. And as we mentioned at the last meeting, not many of our staff in this area have had a break. It's been intense, and it's been absolutely the focus of everyone's attention, because it simply is one of the most important things that we can do for our environment and our beloved kauri forests of the Hunuas and the Waitakere ranges. I just also want to acknowledge the complexity of what we're trying to do today. We've got a whole lot of competing ideas and a whole lot of slightly different ideas on how to approach this, but the single collecting idea is that we wish to protect the kauri of the Waitakeres and the Hunuas to the best possible level. We also need to do it in a scientifically and process way that is robust and understandable and easy to communicate with our community. And we also, hopefully, God willing, we do it with the endorsement and support of our treaty partner, Te Kaurau Amaki. And I think that's been, since the last meeting, one of the most important steps forward. And again, I want to acknowledge Edward and Te Kaurau for putting the amount of energy that they've put into working with the council officers to work through these exceedingly difficult issues against the complexity of a rāhui which is already in place. So just to bring this together, I guess our choice today is around how we make the right decision that takes into account the consultation that we've heard. We do have to, members, listen to the consultation and make our decision in light of that. We have to be cognisant of the fact that we're doing this with DOC and MPI and external parties, and we have to understand the impact of our decision on that. And we also have to make a decision that is actually doable and robust and defendable. So in the light of that, I'll hand over to our staff to take us through the presentation and signal that Councillor Filipaina is happy to move the recommendations and Deputy Mayor Cashmore is happy to second, so that they're on the page for our discussion. So, Who's going to start us off? Barry, over to you.
So thank you, Chair, and with me are Phil from Biodiversity and Rachel from Parks, Regional Parks. Just putting this into context. If we go back to February, and you'll recall the process we went through in February, and there was a proposal there about what officers were recommending happen for the parks, particularly Waitakere and Hunua ranges, and that proposal was to close high-risk tracks in the Hunua ranges, and we talked about what's important there, which is really about keeping kauri dieback out of the Waitakere ranges, and then to address the forested areas in the Waitakere ranges, and that we have that 1st of May date in mind. That was what we set then, and we've been working constructively through with a number of parties, and we'll hear about that as we work through our process in presentation today, that we'd make things effective from 1 May. Part of that process and required us to undergo a consultation with affected parties and bring this back to the session, and that's what we're going to do now, is talk about that consultation process, and we've heard from a number of people already. And that Rachel's going to talk about that consultation process, but there's some other things that we need to cover as well. And one of those is some clarity around tracks and what track closure means, and the criteria for deciding how tracks are closed and opened progressively. And then also to talk about the recommendation in detail, because the officer's recommendation from February still stands today. That's substantially what we are considering here. I need to point out that if we move substantially from that recommendation, we will need to go through a consultation process again. So full closure option C in here, if we go for that, and that is the recommendation here, we will need to go back through that consultation process, because that's a substantial change from what we have consulted on over the last few weeks, and important we understand that. Perhaps what we also need to consider here is this is the first time that anything that we're aware of has been done of this scale in New Zealand. This is a substantial closure we're talking about, closures, never been done before, and that means it's a learning exercise for all of us, and things will have to change over time, because it is a process. We'll decide things, we'll see what the response is, what happens, we'll see the impact on the parks, and we will need to come back from time to time with updates around how this is working, because it's a learning exercise for us. It's actually a learning exercise for the Crown as well as we go through this. So we'll keep that in mind as we consider the recommendations in front of you. So perhaps with that, a good starting point is to step back a little bit and look at what's going on regionally with kauri dieback, and look at the wider Auckland region, not just these two areas that we're considering here, and put that into some context, what we've learnt over the last few weeks and months as we've gone through this.
Well, tēnā koutou katoa. We've summarised before our regional approach in the past reports, but this time we've provided you with a much more substantial review of our regional programs appended to the report. And there was one thing in particular that I wanted to draw your attention to, and that for the completeness of the information that you have, and that's on the picture of the kauri dieback spread in Auckland. So as you'll be able to see from the map, which has previously been handed around, that those red dots are places where we know that there's kauri dieback. There's some pink dots in there where we think that there's kauri dieback. There's a little more uncertainty, and it clearly shows that the Waitakere ranges are badly affected. Our recent surveys showed that the Āwhetu Peninsula is also badly affected by kauri dieback, and that there's been substantial spread there over the past five or 6 years since our first survey. You can also see a scattering of points through the northern Auckland area, through Rodney and what have you. That data actually is from our past survey. So there's a survey underway right now which shows a slightly shows more infection points or likely infection points across that area. So scattered through that area, and that really leaves the major areas that aren't infected in Auckland as the Hunua Ranges, the Waitakere Island, and then some smaller areas like the Waitakere Reserves on the North Shore. You may note that there's no dots along the South Head and the South Kaipara, but that's more that there is limited kauri forest and there has been limited surveying up there, but there is some surveying underway right now, so we may get a slightly different picture for the small amount of kauri there. So given that wide picture, our focus has been on containing the disease in diseased areas like the Waitakere Ranges and trying to protect the healthy areas like the Hunua Ranges and Waitakere and the Waitakere Reserves. We've had this ongoing surveillance program which helps inform how we're going, and we've talked before about the wide range of activities that we undertake to try and limit the spread of the disease and preventing it and getting into those clean areas. It was great to hear from the group working at the Waitakere Reserve in Warkworth. And so they're a group that we have been working with and provided those materials for their station that they've installed. And it's fantastic to have the support of volunteers for that kind of work. And it's the sort of thing we're trying to do across the region. But of course on our limiting existing budgets that we've talked about at length through both these meetings and also through the long-term plan process. And of course we're proposing to greatly increase our investment in kauri dieback in our regional approach. And thus addressing a lot of the points that were raised earlier today about the need for an increased level of science and research going into this work, a faster pace of stations being rolled out across the region and upgraded across the region. And so, yeah, we'll see a continuing expansion of our regional project, regional approach if we do indeed get that money through the long-term plan. I'm going to hand over to Rachel now to talk a bit more about the specific proposals for Hunua and Waitakere.
Kia ora tātou. So when we came to the meeting in February, it was agreed that we would progress proposals for both Hunua Range and Waitakere Ranges. Now that proposal for the Hunua Ranges was to look at closing higher risk tracks throughout the park. I think it's important to note that the kauri dieback management focus for the Hunua Ranges is slightly different from that of Waitakere, with very much the emphasis on protecting kauri dieback from entering the park, or preventing kauri dieback from entering the park, and that's largely through the movement of contaminated soil on footwear and equipment. So this is different from the management at an infected site like the Waitakere Ranges, where the disease is well established and the biosecurity emphasis is on reducing the movement of soil and infected material both within and outside of the park. So to progress the proposal for temporary closures in Hunua, we consulted with both mana whenua and also the Franklin Local Board and held workshops with both of those. The detailed feedback from both of those workshops is attached within the report. I think it's fair to say that they were both largely supportive of increased action in the Hunua Ranges. Through our discussions with mana whenua, Ngāi Tai ki Tamaki, Ngāti Whananga, Ngāti Pawa and Ngāti Tamaoho, there was a strong desire for a longer term, more joined up conversation on the management of the forest moving forwards, recognising that kauri dieback is one threat to this particular forest, but also that there's others, things like myrtle rust and other invasive pests. So definitely a preference for a longer term discussion and a need to just take a little bit more time before that longer term view around further management options is agreed. You will have noted that there was a submission from Ngāti Pawa seeking the cessation of recreational pig hunting, and I should note that we've also had some further correspondence from Ngāti Whananga supporting that position. So the emphasis around management at Hunua is largely around working with the Ministry for Primary Industries to develop a controlled area notice that would prevent the movement of at-risk material into the Hunua Ranges, and also a focus on improving the hygiene station. So really we want to stop the disease at the gates. We don't want it getting past the gates. And since we came to the committee in February, we've slightly refined our proposed list of temporary track closures to reflect both further investigation and the discussions with Ministry of Primary Industries on the controlled area notice. So I'm now going to move to the Waitakere proposal. So in February it was agreed that we would propose or look at progressing a proposal to close the forest with some exceptions. What we've done since that February meeting is that we have sat down with Te Kawerau Maki and we've agreed the criteria for both the forested area and also the criteria for exemptions or exceptions. Those have been developed both with park staff along with the biosecurity team, so it's been a very collaborative effort. Now those criteria for exceptions have very much focused on managing the risk of codidiabetic disease, and they have been looking at tracks that would be outside of the forested area, tracks that could be inside the forest but away from Kodi ecosystems, or tracks that have a condition where the standard, if they were to remain open, would be at a level where visitors could reasonably expect to be able to meet the requirements of a controlled area notice. Now the requirements of the controlled area notice are going to be that there is no visible soil moved in or out of those open tracks. So it is quite a high test. I think one of the points I'd just like to make, at the time that track list was developed for consultation with Te Kawerau Maki and between our parks and biosecurity teams, it was identified that there are a number of tracks on that list that would be taken out for public engagement that did need some additional work to enable them to meet the controlled area notice standard. And those are very much clearly asterisked in the report. And we are working hard with the Department of Conservation to ensure that any future track work is going to be following best practice. And we've got some upcoming workshops to progress those discussions. We've also got dates set down to actually go out and walk the tracks with Te Kawerau Maki to look at those tracks that we have identified as potentially needing that further work, to make sure that we're jointly satisfied that come 1 May they are going to be of a standard that will meet that controlled area notice requirement. So there is no intention to open those tagged tracks if we collectively don't agree that they will be at that level. There were a couple of other additional considerations when we put the list together. We also took into account whether a track would take you to a meaningful destination. So in some instances, we have got tracks that potentially could meet the standards or the criteria I've just described, but because of other closures would essentially lead you to a dead end or not take you to a meaningful visitor experience. So we're not proposing to keep open tracks that would be that kind of situation. And we also looked at tracks and took into account, to the best of our ability, what we would expect in terms of increased visitor use. So we do know that through closing a number of these tracks, if some were to remain open, it's reasonable to expect that more people might want to use them. So did we consider that they would be able to stand up to increased visitor use and still be able to meet those controlled area notice standards? So that's been factored into the discussion as well. So as noted at the February meeting, the proposal to close the forested area of the Waitakere Ranges is a significant decision under the Local Government Act, and before a decision could be made, needed to be subject to consultation with the local board, further discussion with mana whenua, and engagement with those who use and benefit from the regional park, including concessionaires, business, recreational groups, and people that live within the Waitakere Ranges. So Auckland Council consulted with these groups between the 8th and 19th of March using a range of different methods, and I'm just going to quickly talk you through those. So we developed an online feedback form, and that was hosted on Auckland Council's Have Your Say website. The survey link was able to be used by anyone that received it, and it was emailed to a stakeholder list comprising of concessionaires, groups, societies and recreational users, and it was also circulated through the local board to their contacts. We advertised the survey link through the Western Leader, and we shared it on a range of different social media platforms. The questionnaire was sent out using the People's Panel. So it went out to over 1,000 people who live within the Waitakere Rangers local board area. We contacted directly 51 concessionaires by phone and invited them to a drop-in session on Friday the 16th of March. They were also communicated subsequent to that, and we circulated that same opportunity through the local board contact list. Around 30 people attended that drop-in session, so that was hosted by myself and Phil and some of our park staff, and we had a range of people attend that, again from the different interests with the park. Following on from feedback from the Waitakere Rangers local board, we organised a public meeting and held that on Monday the 19th of March. That was advertised the previous week, and it was attended by approximately 45 people. It became sort of a standing room only event, and it included local residents, businesses, and a number of people that walk, run and tramp in the ranges. The Arataki Visitor Centre has had posters and handouts for all of the events, and staff have answered many phone calls. And I'd also just noted reference from the local board to the event at Titirangi, which Phil attended and participated in a panel discussion on Kauri dieback. And last week I also met with a number of different recreational groups, so tramping groups and running groups. From that range of different engagement methods, we had over 800 individual pieces of feedback received, and we're told that that is a very good response rate to a feedback process run over a relatively short time. So just moving now on to a summary of that feedback. I think what came through very loud and clearly was that people value the Waitakere Rangers for a variety of reasons. 7 out of 10 people that responded to the survey or provided dedicated feedback indicated that the proposed closures would impact them personally on a range of different levels. 24% of people felt the proposed option was about right. 25% of people felt that the proposed closures were not enough. Some of the reasons that they gave were that the area is hugely important and it must be protected, and that some people actually felt that tracks should be closed indefinitely. 43% of respondents felt that there were too many track closures proposed, that the effect on the community would be too severe. People love the Waitakere Rangers, they value having them on the doorstep and very much value being able to use them as a beautiful area to walk, run and tramp. So just a few other comments around the public feedback received. 41% of businesses said that the proposal would have a substantial effect on their business. So they said that that would mean, so that essentially means that they would either need to close their business or would have a significant loss of income or need to let staff go if the proposal as it stands goes ahead. People wanted to see a greater investment in research and science about Kauri dieback. There was an emphasis on education rather than enforcement, and I think it was fair to say that that came quite strongly through the public meeting that we had. People's preference, certainly in that forum, was to see the money proposed to go into enforcement being put into track upgrades and research rather than actually going into physically putting a barrier up between people in the park. There was an expectation that closures would be followed by openings. So I think generally there was a sympathetic view to the issue that we've got. Everyone understands we've got a terrible challenge that we need to manage and they want to see us do that. But their preference is to see that there's a clear plan of action beyond the closures that will enable recreation and some form of use to continue into the future. I also think it's fair to note that there was some scepticism, and this has been raised through the public input session, that some people feel that, that there's not substantial information or enough information to justify the management approach, and people want more certainty that what we're proposing will actually solve the problem. So there's a range of views also around what tracks should be opened as a priority as part of that rolling opening concept. I think it's also important to note that there was no substantive feedback from people saying that they disagreed with the criteria we've used for the exceptions or the exemptions, or that the tracks that we proposed would not reasonably meet the controlled area notice standards or those criteria.
So we're looking now at a quite a simplified table for the simple summary of the options that we've put forward. Our recommended option, of course, being that we close the forested area of the Waitakeres as consulted on with those rolling openings, provided that those tracks do meet the standard on May the 1st. Any tracks not meeting that standard would also be closed. And noting that there'd be priority for those rolling openings on reopening the multi-day walk kind of approach. You'll see that there's some pros and cons illustrated here, clearly not exhaustive, but we feel that for this option, the benefits are that the tracks remaining open are relatively low risk, still provides some recreational opportunity, which we hope would lead to higher compliance levels because people will have somewhere to go, and that we have conditional agreement from Te Kawerau Maki about the list, and clearly we need to still be working together to get that full agreement, but we're, as Edward said, pretty close. On the other hand, there are cons for those who want to have more recreational activity in the ranges, and we feel that for all these options there is a con around just how clear we can make the messaging, so there are some challenges there, but that remains our recommended option. The other two options we've put forward are both options essentially that the committee has already considered at previous meetings and rejected. The first is in response to the feedback that we had that more tracks should remain open. So option B that we've put forward is closing those forested areas but keeping more tracks open, particularly in the coastal strip, and still having those rolling openings. This would provide more recreational opportunities for sure, but we do think it would lead to higher risk of spread of Coated dieback. There would be tracks in those coastal areas that wouldn't be able to meet the criteria for a controlled area notice, and that would then create more conflict with how we message that if we have some tracks that you can't meet the criteria for. We haven't agreed this option with mana whenua, and we think it would complicate communications even further. And the final option that we've put forward is, again, one that the committee has rejected, but takes into account the feedback that we've had both from the floor today and from other sectors and the feedback that we've had through the consultation process, and that's the full closure of all the regional park without exceptions. If we could achieve compliance with that, then that would be the lowest risk, as we've illustrated, as we've described before, but we're not confident that we would get high compliance with a complete shutdown. It would definitely provide a very clear message, however. And of course, against that option, there's the cons of there being no recreational opportunity and potentially the increased risk of non-compliance as a result of people not having anywhere to go. And as Barry noted, also it seems that if you did choose to go with that option, then we'd need to go back and consult again on that significant decision. So, whatever the committee decides from those options would result, if you approve any of those options, then what we'll be looking to do in the short term is to get those short-term track improvements and hygiene stations upgraded as soon as possible. Do note that some of those are short-term improvements, that there is a longer-term improvement upgrade process proposed using the funding from the long-term plan, assuming we get that. So this will be about making sure that those tracks are compliant with the controlled area notice requirements for the coming year or so until we can start running through those upgrades. We propose to have those closures being effective from the 1st of May as previously proposed in the February meeting. And just noting that in any tracks not meeting the required standards on 1st of May would also be closed. So we propose to keep a bunch of these open, but if they can't meet that standard, then they'd have to be closed until they can meet that standard. Obviously, we can't put up all the signage and barriers in one day, and so there will be a progressive installation of those, obviously prioritising those that are the highest profile and highest risk, and would expect the controlled area notices to take effect from the 1st of May too. Been talking to Ministry for Primary Industries this morning, and they feel that they're still on track for that. And that the compliance program would start immediately from 1st of May, but it's likely it will take a bit of time to ramp up. In the discussions that we've had with the market, they won't likely have the sort of level of compliance that we might like across all the areas in the Waitakere and the Hunua ranges, so it'll take a little bit of time to get that underway. So just noting again about those short-term fixes to the long-term problem, and I know Edward talked about this, and we agree that there's an issue there with short-term fixes to this long-term program. But what we're really trying to achieve by moving on this now is to reduce the risk before winter and buying ourselves time to do that longer-term strategy and to receive that funding through the long-term plan so that we can develop that more structured and faster-paced upgrade process in the long run. So there will be some short-term fixes, but we're working towards that longer-term solution. Okay, so we heard today from some of the concessionaires that work in the ranges, and there certainly are a range of different activities that are undertaken in the ranges under some sort of concession or permit. We're proposing that the permitted activities that the permitted activity can continue subject to risk assessment and appropriate controls being in place. So that would essentially mean some sort of Cody dieback management and operational plan. Yep. For many of the concessionaires, that will mean working on open tracks only, and so we feel that we can to manage the risk through there, but we do need to also work through with Te Kawerau-Maki and the concessionaires just exactly what that will continue to look like. Pending that 10-year budget outcome, our initial focus will be on re-establishing the coastal connectivity, so being able to get people back down to the coast through tracks that are proposed to be closed now, and the multi-day opportunities in the Waitakere. Just noting some of the feedback that we've had through the consultation. And then in Hunua, the focus would be on upgrading the hygiene stations, particularly remembering that our focus in there is about preventing the disease getting in, and so really making sure that that the entrances are really well managed, as proposed through our long-term plan proposal. As Barry said, this is something that we haven't done before. It hasn't been done in New Zealand before, and so there's going to need to be an adaptive management approach, and we'll need to be continuing to monitor alongside Te Kawerau-Maki and others how it's working. We know that this will probably evolve as we go, and we propose that we come back to within another 12 months to talk about how it has been going and to if any major changes need to be proposed. Just acknowledging that if that monitoring shows that some of the tracks aren't able to be kept open, because they don't meet those controlled area notice standards, then we'd expect to close them until such time that they can. I'd also note that there's been a lot of talk about the confusing messages that are out there, and we know that this is a challenge across all of these options, really. There's been, even if we do a full closure with some rolling openings, as soon as there's a rolling opening, there is a confusing message about which parts of the ranges are open and closed. And so it's about minimising that and having the maximum clarity that we have, that we can achieve. So it's not noted in the presentation, but there is a substantial engagement and communications program proposed to be run out from after this decision as made today, and through coming months, both with MPI and with our own council channels, and we expect to have pretty good saturation of all the channels with this messaging. And just noting, the amount of attention that's on this issue now, there can't possibly be any higher awareness than there has been to date. Just in the past, it's been in the background, and it's regularly on the news and the papers and through all the social media now. So, and just that final note around our ability through the long-term plan to, after the short-term implementation, to be really boosting the pace at which we can do upgrades, the work with the national program to boost the research program, and really get our protection program moving faster. So if the proposed recommendation is approved, there is a requirement to do quite a lot more work in the remainder of this financial year, and that work is not budgeted for. So you'll see from the paper that the total possible expenditure would be $1.18 million. We think in the time that we've got, though, that we're going to struggle to have contractors and suppliers actually deliver the amount of work that we would ask of them in those 2 months. And so we're recommending that a unbudgeted amount of $740,000 is approved, noting that the Finance and Performance Committee actually has the delegation for that approval. And that would cover off a whole range of things outlined in the paper, but including engagement, the signage and the track barriers, the track improvement work, including the hygiene station upgrades in the coming months. So the track ambassador and compliance program, as well as that wider education and communication program. And noting that that would include 2 additional FTEs, 2 additional staff to actually deliver on that work.
Thank you, Phil. As the committee considers the decisions it's got to make, there's some things to take into that consideration process. First of those is the Local Government Act, which requires consider all reasonably practicable options and consider the advantages and disadvantages of each of those options. Consider the views and preference of those likely to be interested or affected by the proposal. Take into account the importance of Kauri and the Waitakere and Hunua ranges to iwi. And again, as we've noted a couple of times already, substantial changes or moves away if the recommendation or decision is a substantial step away from what's recommended, that will need reconsultation and would change deadlines and so forth as we go through that process again. There's also the Waitakere Ranges Heritage Trust, Heritage Area Act, which acknowledges the particular historical and traditional, cultural or spiritual relationships of tangata whenua of the heritage area, Te Kauaramaki and Ngāti Whātua, with any land in the heritage area. It imposes obligations on Auckland Council to maintain processes and provide opportunities for Te Kauaramaki and Ngāti Whātua to contribute to the decision-making processes and how this is implemented, and we've talked about that already. The Reserve Act 1977 has requirements there, provides the Act must be administered for the purposes of providing for the preservation and management of areas possessing recreational use or potential, whether that's either active or passive, for the benefit and enjoyment of the public, ensuring as far as possible the survival of all indigenous species of flora and fauna in their natural communities and habitats, providing for the preservation of representative samples of natural ecosystems and landscapes, ensuring as far as possible preservation of access to the public. So sometimes these things, we've heard about the conflicts that come with these considerations, in fostering and promoting the protection of the natural character of the coastal environment and the margins of lakes and rivers. And so the decision that the committee has to make is complex and has a lot of competing considerations going into that, and we would welcome the opportunity to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Barry. So, questions and questions only. Councillor Casey, Councillor Philip Biner, to start us off.
Thanks, Barry, for that. My question relates to the rahui, and I just need to understand whether the recommendations, if passed today, how they marry up with Te Kauaramāki's rahui. Is it to be lifted if this committee today decides to not close the park? That's not on the agenda, but that's what, according to the report, Kauaramāki want. They want to close the park to prevent human access. So doesn't the confusion continue if the rahui is still in place? So just, I'm happy to hear how you're going to fix it.
Well, I guess we're continuing to work with Te Kaora Amaki, and as you heard today, we're pretty close to agreement on a number of these matters, and we're continuing to work on how we do come up with a final agreement.
Might
So
just add
is
as well
the
that the
Rahui going to be lifted, which is
Well,
my
that's not a
question.
question that we
that's
can
the
answer.
decision for lifting of the Rahui is not a council decision. It's
I
a
understand that,
decision
but
for
has the local iwi said to you that if these recommendations are passed today, the Rahui will be lifted? That would ease the confusion? 'Cause that's not what I read from the report here, that there's two different approaches.
If I may, the discussions that we've had to date haven't centred around what it will take to get the Rahui lifted, because the Rahui is essentially, as we understand, about protecting the forest for as long as there's a threat or an issue that's impacting on the health and well-being of that ngāhere. While we work through this program of Kodi dieback management, there is still going to be an issue with those closed tracks until such time that we can address those. What we've focused on is hopefully getting to a point where we agree that we have a closed area, but there are some places within that and outside of that that are safe for the public to use. And we'll be continuing to work with Te Kaora on how we can also ensure that the tikanga of the Rahui is respected as much as possible through the way that people are using those safe areas.
And if I heard Edward right today, there isn't agreement just right now about the tracks to remain open?
As I mentioned when I was talking through the proposed track exemptions, the comments largely refer to those that we've clearly marked as being still subject to some ongoing work. So we agree with Te Kaora that there is still some confirmation needed for some specific tracks before we confirm whether they would be open from 1 May onwards. We've been doing some active work on those tracks. We've still got some more work planned. Some of that work was relatively minor. There was reference to sort of throwing around gravel. It's certainly more purposeful than that, and we've been working with the Department of Conservation on the right kind of methodology for all of our track work moving forwards. We already know from when we put up that track list to today that there are 2 tracks on that list, the Omanua Nui and the Pururi Ridge track, that we won't be able to open before the 1st of May. We don't expect that now, given the discussions we've had with the Department of Conservation around the best methodology for those tracks. But what we plan to do is work through with Te Kaora. We've got some days booked in to walk some of those tracks, to look at them together, and if we're both satisfied that they will meet the controlled area notice standards, then they will be able to be opened from 1 May onwards. But we've been quite clear in the report that there's some conditions around those tracks.
Okay. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Chair. And Rachel, you mentioned that the walking the tracks with Te Kaora Maki, and my understanding it's 19th and 20th of this month that you'll be doing that. So the ones that end up not being agreed upon, they will stay closed post 1st of May.
That's correct. And in fact, any other tracks that we have proposed remain open. If, during the next few months or, we have an unexpected weather event or the use of those tracks changes in a way that we're not comfortable that they will support the controlled area notice, then we would look to close those as we can through our delegations as park managers.
And just supplementary through you, Chair, I understand that there's the email that we've received. There's actually quite a list of agreed sites, but again, there's also quite a list of those that you will be walking on the 19th and the 20th to then confirm whether they will stay open post 1st of May.
That's correct, and we were reasonably confident when we put those track lists together, and particularly those with the caveat around needing a little bit more work before 1 May, that would be achievable. As I said, there are 2 tracks now we believe that won't be the case because of our conversations with the Department of Conservation. We want to make sure that we're using the right kind of methodology, but all of the others we still remain confident that we can get them to the standard, that they will meet the controlled area notice requirements.
Okay, and maybe, this may be a political decision, I think, Chair, in regards to this next question, so please give me some guidance in regard to this. But there's also, there was also a request around any assistance that we can give to Te Kaurau Amaki around a position there and resource around monitoring, auditing, communications, compliance and enforcement. Is that being discussed with Te Kaurau Amaki in regards to a position that their council, I don't know whether it might be...
No,
Yeah.
it is being discussed.
Awesome,
and-
so, cool, thank you. Thank you, Chair. And I reserve my right to speak, thank you.
Marvellous. Question, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I've got a few, so I might just cut some down and just see what everybody else says for time. My first thing is, you know, when we go out for consultation, I think it's really important to listen. So I look at the results of that consultation and see that 3/4 of submitters want to recreate there. But of the results, 43% have said there are too many closures. You're suggesting too many closures. 43%, which is almost double the number who've said there are not enough, which is 25%, and 24% say it's about right. So what are we saying with your, what are you suggesting via, if you're going for option A, what's the answer to those submitters who said there were too many closures?
So we've looked at this very carefully because we're mindful that we've gone out and spoken to the public and that they've given us this response. I guess we've also had the benefit of being in the room at the drop-in sessions and the public meetings, and also having discussions with the recreational groups. Where we've got to is this is a risk management exercise. We're focused on trying to reduce the risk as best as possible to stop the spread within and outside of the Waitakere ranges of the disease. If we were to take a more permissive approach, we have a challenge in being able to implement a controlled area notice that will be effective, because we would essentially have two sets of tracks, those that would be subject to a controlled area notice and those that wouldn't be able to meet that standard. And given feedback around confusion and mixed messaging, from a risk management perspective, both in terms of letting people know what they need to be able to do, but also ensuring that the disease is being managed to the best of our abilities while still allowing some recreational opportunity, we stand by the recommended option as the preferred approach. I did touch briefly when I spoke about the feedback being that whilst a number of the recreational users would prefer to see more tracks being opened, I think there was also a general acceptance that we've got an issue that we need to manage, and provided we can assure them that there is a plan in place and a commitment to reopen recreational opportunity moving forwards and in not too distant future, that they can accept that to a degree. I think it's where we get into a situation where we don't have any long-term plan for reopening recreational opportunity, we will have issues with support and compliance.
Okay, thank you. My next question is around the time frame. So if we again go for your recommendations, the attachment B gives a number of tracks that will temporarily close because there's stuff to do. There is no time frame that I could see, forgive me if I haven't found it, but there is no time frame that you think those tracks will be up and operating by. Can you give us some assurance that will be done within a year?
So I can give you a partial assurance, because to a certain extent the program of work moving forwards is contingent on the outcome of the 10-year budget process, because there's some different options that have been proposed through that would mean varying levels of resource available for that work. We have been putting our minds to that question, and what we can say is that we're reasonably confident within those different options that have been put forward through the long-term plan process that we would be able to open at the very least between a 3 to 4 day multi-walk opportunity and re-establish some of that coastal connection. At this stage, we haven't looked beyond the first 12 months, because I'd like to just pick up on a point raised by the Waitakere local board and other submitters. We agree it's important that we take this opportunity to look at this strategically and with a forward future focus, to make sure that what we are opening up is going to be a world-class network of track opportunity that sits within this landscape of a significant biosecurity issue, but also caters for changing trends in recreational use in our parks. So we're reasonably confident that a multi-day opportunity and the coastal connection is going to be part of that long-term strategy, but we do want to take the next couple of months to make sure that beyond those first 12 months, what we do open is going to be consistent with a really world-class offering.
So I just need a bit of clarity, because you're asking us, this is very contingent on money, all right? So I'm trying to get it. I don't want to make a decision that actually ends up not doing what I think it's going to do if the money doesn't follow. And so it's a bit sort of, So you're asking here for this up to 740,000. Sorry, I'm just going to labour this point. If we approve that unbudgeted money of 740,000, does that mean that the temporary closures for attachment B could be done in 12 months?
Perhaps if I start that
because I can't rely. I don't know what anyone. I don't know what anyone's going to say
that sum of
today,
money is to get us through this financial year.
this year,
Yeah,
and therefore,
and then it is contingent
so
on.
what's it specifically going to do? That money.
That's for. It's actually set out in the
Yeah,
report,
it is.
but it's it covers enforcement of closures. It covers some physical works that need to be done to make sure that tracks are properly closed and clearly closed, not just a sign up that says they're closed. So there's a range of work that needs to be done this financial year to kickstart this, and then it's then dependent on budgets for.
It's not to make tracks better. It's actually to close tracks. That money is really to enforce. Unbudgeted money is to close tracks.
A proportion of that unbudgeted spend would be to work on some of those improvements we've talked about prior to 1 May.
Okay. And the 2 extra staff members, is that their job? I know that you've said that it needs 2 extra staff people to deliver on that. Is that what they're going to do?
At present, we don't have staff focused on. There's a program of work that will have to be delivered, hence the request for unbudgeted funding for it. We will need resources to manage that process, and that's for those resources.
And look, I'll give you just one more and then I'll stop, Madam Chair, because I'm sure others have got lots of things to say. Somebody, and I can't remember, sorry, which one of the submitters said that actually by people like to recreate there and they do different things, from walking along boardwalks to sort of the real tramping kind of people. How do you feel, what's your professional sort of response when I ask you that potentially if we close a number of tracks, will that actually truly affect what people go to the Waitakere Ranges to do? Will it stop it being the type of place to recreate that it currently is? And how will that affect the tracks that are open with regard to the funding and cost of their ongoing maintenance if you're potentially going to double the number of people using those because they can't do something else?
I'll have a go at answering that question, and if I don't quite get it right,
it's for me. It's a bit of a pebble. It's a pebble that has a lot of ripples, and it's not, in my opinion, right to make one decision without actually knowing what the ripple-on effect is going to be. So I kind of just don't want to carry dieback in isolation. Although I know that's the topic of the paper, but it's actually for me, it's part of a very
I think, Councillor, that is actually a really, really good question. Just, giving our staff a second to breathe. I think it also needs to be taken in the context of, some of this is work that is rolling out and being done. There's the review or the report back in 12 months, or maybe even, I was just talking about a report back post-winter. But there's also the really big bit of work that we've been talking about for the last 5 months, which is, again, echoed by the Waitakere Ranges local board, and our staff are very keen to get their teeth into, which is how do we really get that helicopter view of the tracks and the ranges as an integrated functional whole. There are tracks that we are going to close, plant, and that will be, closed in perpetuity. There is, great chunks of the ranges that will never be available to people, probably in my lifetime, but a different set of connections that can be established that are much safer and much more functional for the Waitakere Ranges. So I guess in trying to answer that question, I'm probably preempting Rachel a little bit, in answering it, you have to understand from whose viewpoint you're viewing the impact. So, difficult question to answer. Rachel.
So, as I said, I'll have a go. So the first part to your question, you specifically mentioned, the different types of opportunities that people want to go to the Waitakere Ranges for. And I know that one of the things that we've heard from recreational groups is that they don't want to see the Waitakere Ranges track network turned into sort of a highway of boardwalks. They want to be able to have a range of different experiences. That might mean some gravelled tracks, some boardwalk tracks, some tracks that are a bit more rustic and natural than that. And, we believe that moving forwards, we can achieve all of those things. It will take some planning, but there are areas within the ranges that are away from Cody trees. It's not inconceivable that a track could have a range of different track surface methods. You might have a track that's got some board walking, some stretches of just natural surface, and some box steps, for example. So, that's completely conceivable, and it's definitely part of the feedback we've received. People don't want to see that. We think we can achieve that, but it's going to be contingent on that longer term strategy piece that I talked about. At the moment, with the proposed closures under the recommended option, there are some opportunities that are going to be largely restricted. So that multi-day walk opportunity, that really long walk, that slightly more backcountry experience is going to be quite heavily impacted through this proposal. But we talked about those multi-day opportunities and the coastal connections that would enable some longer loop walks being a priority for reopening within the first 12 months, and we're reasonably confident we can achieve that. I think the other point that I would just make to your question is that the proposed exceptions, do still allow, despite restricting those longer walk opportunities, a range of different things that people can still go and do. And some of those are quite popular places. Obviously the beach areas are outside of the Rahui and outside of the proposed forest closures. We have a number of other shorter walk opportunities that are very popular. And, fortunately, those are also a lot of the tracks that we have invested quite heavily in to make sure that they're of a good quality, because we know that they have high visitor volume. Therefore, we've reflected that in the way that we've managed those tracks. So, they are reasonably well set up to support continued use and potentially some increased use, but it will still be needed to be managed and monitored as we go forwards.
Perhaps I might just add too that we've talked about an adaptive management approach to this, and that's just something we're going to have to do as we see how different things that we do, what the responses to those is, and the impact that those responses have on the park and on our goal of preventing the spread of curried eyeback. So it will require an approach that's going to change over the months in front of us.
Okay, so just to let people know, we've got questions from Deputy Mayor Cashmore, Member Blair, Councillor Watson, Councillor Lee, Councillor Hills, and then we will do a bit of a time check, because I think people are getting probably in desperately need of a quick break, so we'll make a decision after we hear from Councillor Hills' question. Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Mine are very short. With relation to the Hunua's 17 official entry points and numerous unofficial ones. Pigs are a big issue, the release of feral pigs. So what are we going to be doing to, one, stop the pigs transfer from the Waitakeres or anywhere else that matter going into those entry points? People, also, and more importantly, mountain bikes. Very popular activity through the Hunuas, especially with pig hunters on mountain bikes.
Pig hunters on mountain bikes.
Yeah, they all have them.
Pig hunters and mountain bikes?
At least in that way you can get two issues dealt with at the one time, I guess. So in relation to the feral pig population in the Waitakere and the Hunua Ranges, beg your pardon, of course there is currently recreational hunting, and that's quite focused on some parts of the park. But the Cody forest, or the areas where there's the most Cody,
Northern end.
Yeah, the northern end and some other down the eastern side, there's meant to be no recreational hunting in those areas. Okay. We're about to kick off a contracted pig control program starting later this month. It's been in plan for some time, but is actually getting underway, and that is specifically targeting those closed areas and the areas that there shouldn't be any recreational pig hunting happening, and particularly around the Kauri forest, to reduce the risk of pigs ultimately spreading the disease. As we heard from Ngāti Pawa and Ngāti Whanaunga today, that they're asking that we put a stop to recreational pig hunting, but that position's just come into us today, so we haven't had a chance to discuss that. The mountain biking has been part of our consideration in the trails that mountain biking occurs, but actually thinking, Rachel, you might be a better place to talk about the mountain biking aspects. But before we go back to that, the compliance program that we're proposing will be most visible at track entrances, but that won't be the only place that we'll be intending to do it. And we'll be needing to gather, intelligence of where those non-official or unofficial entrances are, and how we work with the people that are using those to reduce the spread of disease.
Yeah, the bikes are going in by the official tracks, particularly up top of Ness Valley, O-Town, those sort of places. But, so stations there that bikes have to go through would be a great thing. My second question is, what does a fit-for-purpose track look like? Is it just a shingle track, or has it got wooden sides? Just paint me a picture of what that looks like.
Well, it actually varies depending on the circumstance, and so the Department of Conservation has had some significant additional resource that they've been able to put into looking at different track methodology around Kauri ecosystems, and it can range from a metal track surface through to boardwalk. And also they're more increasingly using sort of a geotextile track surface, particularly when they're needing to put tracks over the top of Kauri routes. Yeah. Because one of the issues is making sure that the track methodology not just helps manage the spread of mud or prevent the transfer of mud to footwear, but also that the roots of the trees are not impacted through the track presence, because a healthy tree is more likely to be resilient to disease. So there's a range of different options, and it just depends on whether you're in close proximity to Kauri, whether your track needs to go over the top of the root system. And so we're working with the Department of Conservation. We've got some workshops coming up. We're actually going to be going out on site with them and saying, hey, in this situation, this is what we think would be the most appropriate way of dealing with this area that needs upgrading. What do you think? And making sure that we've got a common view around what is best practice in our situation.
Yeah. My last question, Madam Chair, is to do with human behaviour. I've heard lots of anecdotal remarks about people in the Waitakeres over a lot of the tracks over the Easter weekend. Do we actually have any numbers from our ambassadors about people who are going on the tracks over that long weekend?
I may turn around and look behind me to see whether Stephen Bell, our Principal Ranger, can answer that question.
Feel free to come up, Stephen. Just while Stephen makes his way up, I just want to acknowledge the extraordinary work that you've done over this incredibly busy time, Stephen. It's hugely appreciated.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We don't have the exact numbers from Easter weekend, but we do know areas like Kitikiti Falls probably attracted many hundreds. Over the weekend itself, it will be well over 1,000. Beveridge Track is always popular. Arataki Nature Trail also. You'll get up to 12,000 people in a month walk that.
12,000?
Yes. It is a well-formed track and well capable of dealing with that volume. But also we have, over the Easter weekend, had other counters in play for tracks that are closed. They continue to show a very small level of use, but ongoing use.
Thank you. And thank you for the work that you've been doing.
Thank you. Member Chair.
Kia ora, thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to Council. Councillors here have been bold and courageous and acted with a lot of discernment, shown great leadership, and I'm asking for a little bit more. But not too much more. I think most of the public agree, and thanks to the staff for the stellar work that you've done to date. Do you consider, like, we are getting approval from a council area notice criteria or set of standards? Could we look at, I believe official sign-off needs to happen from the Te Kawerau Maki too. So perhaps an amendment to B suggesting, with the requirements of the proposed controlled area notice, just suggesting that to include Te Kawerau sign-off, because I still believe there's some gap area between what tracks that you believe would remain open and what tracks Te Kawerau. So I think if we have that, it's not that it's not a trust thing or anything like that, I just think it's a formality that we should approach. What's your response to that if we amended it?
Just for clarification, the standard, well, the controlled area notice standard is not one that we necessarily. So we're referring to trying to meet that standard, but the Ministry for Primary Industries will put that standard in place. We've certainly said in the report, and there's an ongoing commitment to work with Te Kawerau Maki to agree on those tracks that we've said have still got a caveat over the top of them. In our discussions, we've been talking very much about that concept of being able to meet the controlled area notice as being the benchmark or the measure.
Yeah, but my question's
and I think that
directed around specific sign-off. Are you open to that being included as an amendment?
My understanding is, and maybe we just need to turn that to sort of a political level, my understanding is that to a large degree is the work that has been done, all the tracks in here that are, being discussed for opening are being discussed with Te Kawerau Maki, and that process is already underway. I guess we can, and it's the mover and seconder, if you want to enshrine that wording with a little bit of assistance in the recommendations, that may be to clarify the process. I would imagine that would be acceptable. So let's, rather than an amendment, I think it would be good if the mover and seconder want to do a little bit of work to get that right. That may be useful.
Okay.
Barry?
I'm not sure what then applies in the Hunuas and how that works, so I need some guidance on this from some others.
I think this is the difficulty, and I apologise as
It's
chair.
just related
I'd
to B only.
undertaken to kind of make sure that we peeled the two apart.
Yeah.
So we just need to think of the Hunua decision and what.
Shall I try and help?
Just if I can just finish that, so that we can't sort of muddy the issue between the two. So we need to keep Hunua separate, and then when we think about Te Kawerau, we need to make sure that that's in relation to the Waitakere ranges, because I think Ngati Paua might be asking us some questions.
So if we look at recommendation A, that can stand alone.
Yeah.
If you look at recommendation B, which relates to the Waitakere ranges, paragraph 6, we talk about the approach. It's already in place. Council staff work alongside Te Kawerau Maki, agree the proposed closure area, and identify a list of tracks that remain open for consultation with impacted communities. So that's the principle working on. And that's what you've asked to be put into the recommendation, member B, effectively. So why don't we just take that wording and add it to recommendation B, and that makes explicit.
Yep, that was.
What
I was
we're
trying to
talking
work
about.
at the back.
I did. I wondered. That's why I wanted to refer it to the mover and seconder, because Councillor Filipaina and I do read each other's minds. And even though he didn't either text or bring me a note, I thought that was exactly what you were probably working on. So let's just, if you can, Member Blair, if you're happy for Councillor Filipaina to, when we get to the recommendations, speak to that, that would be great.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
And just thank you for your work, and I just feel also in a role of governance that we have a local board who has also proposed some recommendations. Could I encourage you to work closer with them to include their feedback into information that receives to us, because in real governance the local board should really also lead the way in terms of their issues being there. So I just feel there's a little bit of a disconnect, but I encourage you to work together and have confidence moving forward. Sorry, Linda, did you?
All good?
It's a regional park.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you. Just two quick questions. The first goes to what decision-making is or isn't enabled as a consequence of the consultation process. There's been some reference to having to undertake another consultation process if it was full closure. Just correct me if I'm wrong, but the consultation in its broader sense proposed to close the forested areas of the Waitakere Ranges Regional Park with some exceptions, so that was what we were consulting on. If for argument's sake, the number of exceptions is very small, it's kind of loose as to what the word some would mean then, wouldn't it? We've got 44 potentially tracks that are open here. If it's a much, much reduced number that everyone agrees on, that's obviously meeting that criteria that we went and consulted on.
When we went out for public engagement on the proposal, we included the list of exceptions or proposed exceptions. So it was the proposal to close the forested area subject to some exceptions, and then they were provided as a list. So people have provided feedback on the basis that they would be the exceptions, and I think our advice is that if it was going to be a more substantive closure, then potentially we would need to go back and consult on that, because under that scenario there would be, for example, a greater proportion of recreational users that would not be able to recreate, a larger proportion of the concessionaires who would potentially not be able to operate. So it is a slightly different proposal.
Might also add just to that as well is that option A, of course, is about including prioritised openings as tracks are upgraded. So it's got a program there of opening over time, whereas option C is close all forested areas. So it's a substantially different.
Yeah, I'm just trying to sort of tie down a bit the notion as to what would meet the spirit with which the consultation was undertaken, and I guess my reading of that is that we might have a little more discretion than perhaps has been suggested, but I'll leave that to the debate. My final question kind of follows on from Member Blair and goes to the kind of decision-making involvement of the relevant parties when the tracks are, decided to be open. Again, I mean, Rachel, you said, I think, if we collectively don't agree, it shouldn't be open, words to that effect, and that was with Te Kawerau Maki. Clearly, the local board has an interest in this, and this, again, might be more for debate, but I'd be interested in your view. If we have a balance between the biosecurity officers and our staff, and Te Kawerau Maki and the local board, isn't that really covering everyone off there? And there's a degree of similarity of view, I would suggest, between those four parties anyway. Wouldn't that be a more comprehensive group that then would give certainty right across everyone, really? Because presumably someone like the local board picks up on both the community that's inputted into this consultation and special interest groups like the concessionaires.
So just firstly make, just in terms of your comments around the substantive nature of the proposal and the tracks that we're looking to reopen, it's probably just worth reflecting that 67% of people that responded to the engagement process either thought what was proposed was about right or wanted more permissive openings. In terms of what we're looking at reopening before 1 May, which is really the subject of the discussion or the question that you've raised, we're very much focused on the criteria of whether the track surface condition will be to a standard where it can meet the controlled area notice. Now, we've agreed that we will walk those tracks with Te Kawerau Maki, and the people that will be doing that will be one of our experienced park rangers that knows those tracks well, one of our biosecurity experts, and a representative from Te Kawerau. So it's very much focused on whether the track conditions are going to be adequate based on that walkthrough to be able to meet that test. I'm aware that the local board has other concerns around some of the tracks that are proposed to remain open, and things like whether they're fit for the volume of visitors that they're receiving, and some other concerns. And those things will be picked up through that longer term strategic assessment piece that I talked about, because we agree too we need to look at that bigger picture plan for the park. But at the moment, in terms of the discussion in front of us and what we're proposing to open by 1 May, that's very much targeted on managing the risk associated with Cody dieback and not looking at all of those other additional considerations like the way people are using the park and whether some areas should be more or less developed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll pick up on those issues in the debate.
All right. I've got Councillor Lee, then Councillor Hills, and then we'll work out our next steps. Councillor Lee.
Thank you. Just zooming up a bit, looking at this map you've given us. Am I right in interpreting this as seeing curry dieback on Little Barrier Island?
That's an excellent question, Councillor Lee. We've been discussing that quite a bit this last couple of weeks. There are no samples that have been taken on Hauturu Little Barrier that have come back positive for Cody dieback. However, there have been aerial surveys undertaken in 2014 that showed quite a number of stands of ill-thrift Cody on the island. Ill-thrift meaning, you know,
know what ill-thrift means.
But for the room, just meaning that they're not in good health. Some of those have been visited on the ground and didn't seem to be exhibiting Cody dieback symptoms. But we've just been talking with Doc about the need to, with some alacrity, get out there and actually get the soil samples to confirm one way or the other whether the Cody dieback is there. Because there is a concern that it may be infected, but no confirmation.
So you've put it on this diagram anyway, just in case?
Well, the dot is a pink dot, which is that Cody with possible Cody dieback infection.
It's in the key.
Well, okay. All right, thank you. Now, next question. Let's come back to the money, because I guess that's one of our important roles here as members of the governing body. 740,000 unbudgeted. Can you give us a breakdown roughly? You obviously have come to that precise figure, so what will that go on?
If I can refer you to Table 1, which is on page 25 of the agenda, there's quite a detailed breakdown there. Would you like me to go through that? Or?
Let me ask this question. How much is going to be spent on closing tracks as opposed to repairing tracks?
Yeah.
Yep, so we have, you'll see that there's two columns in the paper. So there's what we assessed as the requirement cost, and then a risk-adjusted cost based on what we think we might actually be able to spend in the time. So I'll look at that column. So we're suggesting that between now and the end of the financial year, there would be something like $130,000 spent on track improvements, as well as another $85,000 on station upgrades. So that's $200,000 or something on the track improvements in that short term. Then a lot of the other costs are related to the closure. So you'll see some costs for the consultation we've done. It would be around having people, ambassadors, messaging the closures, some compliance work to make sure that the closures are being followed and that the controlled area notice requirements are being met by visitors. You'll note there's a little bit of potential loss of revenue from some concessionaires who will have reduced activity in the park. Significant communications around not just the closures, but about that'll be tied in with general Cody dieback messaging. We've got some money for closing car parks at track entrances where they're closed. And then we've got feedback from the governing body that they'd like to see more substantial closures where there are closures and much more obvious closures. So we've budgeted money for putting up barriers essentially, as well as signage.
So at this stage, we can say that most of the money relates to closing rather than repairing?
For the short term, yes. But of course, in the LTP, it's $20-odd million on track upgrades.
another member raised this question earlier on, but resourcing, I think the word was used for kawarau amaki. Can we have transparency on how much money is paid or will be paid to kawarau amaki in this matter?
As yet, no money's been paid to kawarau amaki.
I realise that, but the
but
manager agreed there would be, so it'd be good to get transparency so
can do that.
everything is clear.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Hills.
Yes, thank you. So I've got two questions. One, so the consultation that went out was what we unanimously agreed on in February. The other question I have, and it's probably concerns for this lovely little green area, that obviously we're quite lucky in Kaipatiki to still be in the green, but I'm not sure people really realise how much native forest we have there, especially Kodi, that, you know, it's probably the largest apart from Waitakere and Hunua. What do we do? And I know we keep talking about, yes, we're putting some protections in, and yes, we're going to close down in the Hunua area, but this is the closest area to the Waitakere Ranges, and I can imagine a lot of people, and we're already seeing an increase in visitors to the areas of Kodi Glen and Kodi Point, and over the fence from my house where there's large stands of Kodi and Bayview Glenfield. What are we doing there to make sure that, you know, I'm not satisfied that there is enough that is going to go on to protect these areas which are so untouched by Kodi dieback. Once it's in somewhere, and that's my concerns around the complete closures and things, is we just push everyone to the areas where we have none, and then we are left with a Tamaki Makaurau with no Kodi in the end. So what can you say that's not just the Hunuas in this area? Because I feel that's more at risk, maybe.
Well, of course, in the long-term plan proposal, hopefully from July, we'll have increased funding to accelerate the programs of track upgrades and what have you. There is this window, though, between now and that money being available and the works being able to commence. And so we've been working with community facilities just recently around how the full facilities contract is delivering the Kodi dieback protection that's in those contracts, and there's a bit of room for improvement in there from just how that's been delivered. So I'm confident that we'll have that up and running much better by hopefully by May, but in the short term. And we'll also be meeting with people like Pest Free Kaipatiki around what sort of role the volunteers might take in continuing to be ambassadors and to be able to undertake some works themselves along the lines of what we heard from the Pari Kauri Reserve Group earlier today. There's lots more we would like to do, and that lots more is proposed to come from the long-term plan budget.
Cool. So yeah, so just making sure, I mean, I don't want to tell you to suck eggs, but it is sort of 540 hectares just in Kaipatiki of native bush, and I just don't think people often realise that the significant risk to that as well. So I'm happy to hear it, but I want to see more, you know, coming back. I know the local board were going to speak, but
I think, Councillor, that's a really important thing for us to report back on, and particularly for the Kaipatiki local board and for you and your fellow councillor. Okay, final question, Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and again, apologies for lateness. Thank you for what I heard of your presentation. I'm new, so I don't know this, but how long before Kauri is wiped out?
That's a tough question to answer. What we've seen in the Waitakere Ranges is a rapid spread, though. So in the Waitakere Ranges over the last 5 years or so, we've seen a doubling of the infection rate to roughly 20%. And so if that continued, then, you know, within 30 years or so, you'd essentially have no Kodi left in the Waitakere Ranges. And that's, you know, been a driver behind the urgency that all this work's been happening. We hope, though, that we can continue to protect places like the Hunua Ranges and indeed Kaipatiki and Waiheke Island and other places that don't currently have it, and that we can do that into the long term so that Kodi isn't wiped out. and that's why we've proposed such a big increase to our existing budget through the long-term plan. But certainly Cody is very much at risk in Auckland if we don't invest heavily enough to stop the spread of the disease.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's the end of our round of questions. So just a time check. I'm aware that we have had a long day and need to continue. So we just need to make the choice between whether we break very briefly and grab a bite to eat and then come back to the debate, or given the huge amount of discussion we've had, whether we actually just plug on and deal with the recommendations. Are these strong feelings either way?
Break.
So Kathy is keen for a break. Anyone desperate to just plough on?
Plough on.
Okay.
Well, I'm big enough to absorb all the food I've already eaten.
Can you share some around?
I think considering the lack of response, I think people have now got to the stage where the sugar levels are so low you're not actually functional. So, and that's not a good way to go into a debate. I'm going to suggest about a 20-minute break. It's time. I know it's short, but we've got a lot of people waiting for this discussion, and we still have an agenda. So we will. I move that we break for 20 minutes and come back at quarter to whatever it is, the next number. Thank you.